Well, this mall was built in the late 1970s, 78, 79. It was pretty much empty over the last 10 years. And now it's this spot that's supposed to be redeveloped. So I moved to this location, and I'm going to flip the phone here in a minute to talk to you folks. Welcome to Carport Carl. This isn't necessarily about automotive stuff, but I am going to post this video. And I'm going to try to keep it a reasonable length. But the reason I'm making this video, and I'm sitting here at this old mall that is closed, is I'm in my 60s. I've lived, in the United States during the 20th century, the boom years, as people want to call them, or the better years, some people call them. And there's a cultural divide going on right now between boomers and I think it's Gen X, the people right after me, and then millennials and the younger crowd. And the division is trying to place blame on my generation because of these benefits that the government established and stuff. And the younger people are trying to blame capitalism for it. And it's all of it. And what I mean by that is there's incorrect capitalism. There's this, what do they call it? It's when the government and the capitalists work together. There's a term who's escaping me now. It's crony capitalism, for lack of a better word, where these companies that are big come in there and they have so much money and so much power they can influence and change things that normally would not be able to occur. This is why I believe in the anti-monopoly laws that were repealed under George W. Bush. Congress, both sides are to blame, Democrats and Republicans. They peeled away these monopoly laws that allow companies to get too big. And that shouldn't occur. Why? Because here's my thinking on that. And you people out there, especially you younger people, you should consider this. If these companies were not allowed to get that large, what would happen? Well, that means, Amazon's not exactly a good example, but it's an example because of what it's affected here. Amazon started out as a bookstore online and just kept expanding into all kinds of stuff. And now they're not only sales, but they're also business services and computer services and all that. Well, should one company be allowed to get that big? And I say no, because the money that, like, Bezos, bald-headed Bozo, he has done things that I disagree with politically and stuff like that. So I don't want to put money in his pocket, but yet I've still purchased stuff there, and I try to be selective of who I do buy my stuff from. But in the context of a modern society, you can't always be that selective, but you can do your best. But my point being is, if his company was not allowed to get that large, and you say you had 4 or 5 retailers or 6 retailers that were that big, or not that big, but bigger. So you got Amazon and Walmart are kind of like the 2 largest ones, and the only 2 I can think of off the top of my head that are big online companies. Target does some of it. But if you don't allow companies, I'm just doing this randomly, so it's thoughts off the top of my head, so bear with me. If you don't allow companies to get that large, what happens? That means they have to compete with other companies that are out there. They can't control the market, because I've heard this and I've seen writings on it, that Amazon has so much influence in the retail space that they go to people who are or people who come to them, or people that go to their stuff. They end up forcing prices on the person. In other words, yeah, I can understand a retailer negotiating with another company, but when you tell somebody, oh, we're only going to buy your product at this rate, and you're making, just barely enough. In other words, you're supplying them a product, but it's making you so little that you don't want to not sell there because at least get your name out, but you're not making enough that you would if you went through some other venue. I don't think any company should have that much power. In other words, you should just be able to negotiate and say, I want to sell this product and I want to buy it at this, and you negotiate back and forth, and that there should be enough other businesses out there to create the competition enough that the person can say, no, I'm not doing it. I'm going to Walmart. I'm going to go to Target. I'm going to go to whoever else is out there and sell my product through them. So then that prevents one company having such authoritarian control on prices to force other manufacturers, companies that are out there, to live at a substandard level or not make as much money, while then Amazon or whoever ends up jacking the price up, 2, 3, 4, not 5, 10 times, 15 times, whatever it is. And then they make all the money on the product when they didn't build it, manufacture it, nothing like that. So it's all about competition. It is. You can't communist structure this stuff. Soviet Union collapsed. China had to abandon their communism and go to what they do now because, one, dumbass politicians in this country were so stupid they loosened the laws to allow all this stuff and actually encouraged all this stuff to go to China when that should have never happened. Stuff should have been kept here in America so that you and I, fellow Americans, could have jobs. So getting back to the job thing, I don't think one company should be that big. I don't think a dozen companies should be that big. Because what happens is, if the company's smaller, guess what happens to you as a person living in the United States? Oh, I get to go see if they have a job available over there. Oh, wait, I get to go see if they have a job available over there. Because it breaks it down so that a company as big as Amazon or big as Walmart can't use their volume, their automation, the fact that they've got just so much to then force employees to work excessive hours. I hear that's a big thing with Amazon. And work should always be a balance between the employer and the employee. If you got somebody who's just breathing down your neck, like, nitpicking the clock and stuff like that. Now, one, you as an employee shouldn't be, as an American, as an employee, you shouldn't be a lazy ass and just trying to barely get by on minimal amount of work. That's not the way things work. If things pick up, speed picks up, and you got to work more, faster, harder, you do it. But that shouldn't be the way you live all the time. Work should have an ebb and flow based on patterns and cycles that exist in life. And so my biggest take of being here is I don't think companies should be that large. I don't think companies should be so large that there is no competition in the context of jobs. If we had 20 retailers and Amazon was not as big, then you would have 20 different, larger national type companies to go look at, whether it be online or at a store or something like that, to buy your products. Now, the convenience of this technology stuff and the shipping that they've done, it's opened up new jobs. You got guys driving trucks and women driving trucks, and you got the delivery. But is that job still pay enough for somebody to support their family on? I don't know. But not every job is designed to do that. They got these people out here who always whack a living wage. I'm sorry. Your introduction job at Burger King, McDonald's, in my generation was where people went when they were teenagers or in college to work through college to make some money. That was never meant to be a career unless you wanted to move into management or district manager or something like that. Now, that's a possibility at those places, but that's not the point. And I applied for a job at Arby's 28 years ago. And thank goodness they turned me down, because I moved into technology and I've probably quadrupled my salary that they would have ever offered. But they only wanted to offer me like $28,000 a year to work like 70-hour weeks. Well, I had a newborn child. I'm like, oh, hell no, I'm not doing that. So I just kept looking. I ended up finding a job that paid well, not at first, contract work in IT. And in a 2-year period, I doubled my salary. So there are jobs that can do that. You just got to look for them. But my biggest beef about the online stuff is this mall that was here for and functional for at least 40 years, close to 40 years, if not beyond 40. People came here during the week, weekends. It was kind of a hangout for teenagers and early young adults. During the week, older folks who are retired or semi-retired would come to the mall, have a small breakfast at one of the cafeteria places, walk the mall for exercise. So malls that became large, and again, for those of you who might be younger, these malls became large in the 60s. They weren't that way in the 50s and even into the mid 60s. It was the later 60s when you started seeing these larger malls show up. This became a cultural icon in America for my generation. I remember going to college right over here, and I'd come over during a break because I had a later afternoon class. So I'd go grab lunch, whether it be here at the mall or at one of the fast food places. I'd come to the mall, hang around for about an hour, and I always loved books, so I'd buy a book about, I don't know, once a week, once every 2 weeks, something to read. And so the bookstores was kind of the place I hung out. And so malls became a cultural icon. They became a place where people could socialize. People, there's a movie out there, can't think of the name of it. I think Sean Penn was in it as a teenager, and it was filmed at Metro Center Mall here in Arizona. This is the early 80s, I think. And that movie is kind of an example of the cultural icon that malls became. And it probably changed over the generations from the late 60s, when people had more public behavior that was more regulated and controlled, to when that movie comes out and they show these teenagers acting like idiots. Well, I was about within that age frame of when that movie came out, not as a teenager, but those actors were like, in their early 20s. And yeah, I even my own family, even my own kids have said I was born 40, because they just know I have this much more adult type behavior and demeanor as they look at life. But for me, this became a cultural icon. This became what you would call the norm of American life. Well, what did that provide? They had hundreds of businesses in here. So you had people working in the food court and all the different stores, mall maintenance and cleanup. This mall probably created several thousand jobs. And those jobs lasted over a 40-year period. Well, what are they doing now? All these retailers are going online, which there's nothing necessarily wrong with that. And I know back in the early 2000s when they were saying, "Oh, don't regulate," there should have been some regulation on the internet and what was happening. But I know the reason behind it. That's a whole nother story. And that goes way, way beyond politics and into the depths of cultural problems in America. But there were thousands of jobs associated with this mall. Now you might say, well, were there thousands all the time? No, but if you look at the size of the stores that were here, there was a Sears, a Dillard's, later a Best Buy, and then all these other little smaller shops that were through here. The one thing this mall should have had was a theater, is what it should have had. But, easily 500 people are employed here every day. And I would look at it and think, by the size of it and the maintenance crews and stuff, probably, 500 to 1,000 people worked out of this place, in a 7-day work week. And so, because it was open, and again, back then, malls didn't open up till after church on Sundays, so they didn't open up till noon. I think if my memory serves me correctly, the mall didn't open till 1, and then it moved to noon, then it might have moved to 11, then at 10 a.m. on Sundays, but that was stupid. And that was a cultural thing in my day. Businesses didn't open until like noon. Why? Because Sundays were considered, day of worship. People believe that in America. And so businesses didn't open. The only thing open on Sundays during the day hours, gas stations, not all, but some, hospitals, and some food courts or food businesses that were more along freeways. If you were in the middle of the city, they weren't open on Sundays, or if they did, they opened later. So that's the cultural shift that America has changed and has made. And think about it. Okay, if this mall and that many different businesses running in here employed 1,000 people a week, well, does that really work when you have an online retailer who takes all these same products and sells them, and then they're shipped? Okay, but then when they're shipped, you've got some of these contract people who deliver for Amazon, and I've seen some YouTube videos where people complain about they don't even order, they don't even give you the orders in mathematical path, so your driving distance is the shortest. So these people don't make a lot of money at it. And so my just argument here is all the online stuff isn't necessarily the best thing. I personally think it should have been regulated to some extent. Like Amazon shouldn't be able to sell everything. And Amazon shouldn't be able to have not only a full-blown retail stuff, but then they also have now all this technology stuff. Well, I look at it from the other perspective. You build your technology to run your main business, which would have been your retail. Why are they allowed to then do Amazon's web services? That should be a whole spin-off company, whole new structure. Why? Because that would create jobs in different areas of the country, and you wouldn't have this similar effect. In other words, they have one massive HR department. Well, if you have the company broke off where Amazon cannot be a web services company, that's all separate. They have to have their own corporate structure, their own corporate leadership, their own HR department, their own, so it creates more jobs for you and I out here in the real world, even if it is online services or online business. But what are we missing or what is the next generation, the Gen X, Gen Z, Gen whatever you are, Alpha, whatever they call them? What are you missing, and what are you going to not have in your culture and your upbringing about America? You're already being taught America's bad, which is really stupid. Politicians are bad. Politicians are corrupt. A lot of corporate leaders are corrupt by their crony capitalism, looking for government favors and structure law so I kind of stay in business, but it makes my competitors hurt. No, that kind of crap should never occur. You should be able to compete face-to-face with a small company to a big company, and the big company shouldn't be able to just muscle you out of business as a small company. No, if you can't compete with that guy by him selling his product and you not doing something stupid behind the scenes to try to drive him out of business, well, it just proves you're an idiot and your business can't stand up to competition. So, no, there should be laws in place to protect the small business. And that means that, hey, what if you out there watching this, what if you want to start a business? What if you've got an idea that you thought of, whether it be around automotive stuff or a service, yard maintenance, whatever it might be, some unique thing you thought of. And then all of a sudden, these big companies get wind of you as you start to build and produce. And now they want to either try to buy you out or put pressure on your suppliers and stuff like that. That, to me, is not capitalism. That is evil, and it's also wrong morally. In other words, okay, I'll use Target, Amazon, Walmart, as the top guys. They all have online structure. They all have retail outlets. If you, watching this video, come up with some device, trinket, whatever you want to call it, that they haven't thought of, or they haven't thought of in a way that you've thought of, and you're out there building it, making it, you start working with suppliers, and say you decide, you know what, I'm not going to China. I'm going to go here in America, and I'm going to start, and you start building something, and it starts to take off, and you might have hard times, but now all of a sudden you're making some money. And then they get wind of this, and it could affect them. Well, what do these companies normally do when something like that can affect them? They'll lower their price to draw customers away from you, that kind of stuff. And if they can't, if you have something very unique, but it's still affecting their business, then what do? They try to affect your suppliers. They try to go to the politicians and try to put pressure for laws and tax stuff to be structured that benefits them and not you. And that is totally wrong. They should just compete in the marketplace, come up with a better idea, come up with better service, better customer service, whatever. Look, if somebody built something that's unique and it's not under patent where you can't touch it or whatever, go figure out what you need to invent, And when it comes to corporations in America, here's where I disagree, and a lot of you I disagree with what exists, and here's where a lot of you might agree with me. There are laws that have been passed, and Supreme Court agreed to this, that these companies can just create these like pockets of money and give to them, and then this money's given to these politicians. Well, you and I can only give, I think it's like $2,500 to a politician per cycle, so I can give $2,500 to them during the primary, then I could give another $2,500 during the regular election, which I'm not going to do. I don't have that kind of money. But these companies give millions and millions of dollars. I honestly believe that in this country, it's people who vote, not corporations. And we need to have a law passed, and the Supreme Court might try to say, oh, well, we're going to rule on this. Do whatever it takes to say, no, you can't. And that is, only people can give to politicians, and there is a dollar limit, and companies cannot give to politicians at all. And the reason I'm pointing over here is a mall. The mall represents all the companies that were here. And so what happens is the companies cannot give money at all. The leadership of the corporations cannot give any more money to a politician than I can. So if it's $2,500, it's $2,500. And the corporation cannot give to politicians. And if a corporation wants to, say, affect policy, they're not allowed to secretly go behind and talk to politicians. If you can't give them money, then they're still, okay, what kind of favors can they do for them? No, that shouldn't be allowed. What should be allowed, because we have the internet, or required, not allowed, is the corporation has their website. They should have a page that says, this is our political stance on these issues. And the issues would be what affects them in their business, not this hokey woke crap. And so what happens is their website would be, okay, national company. It could be, okay, here's Arizona, here's Texas, here's what we believe and support in this, here's the laws that we would support and why. And it only comes out, and they don't even have to do it. But if they want to say, they can say on their website, this is why we support this particular law. And they can say that verbally, publicly, city council meetings, whatever, county council meetings. But they can't give money. They can't give favors. And then you and I can go to that website and still see, where do this company that I'm shopping at stand on this issue? What are their arguments? What do I know is the counter argument? That kind of thing. And that would get rid of a lot of corruption in this country, because the corruption of large amount of corporate money that you and I spend to these companies and then goes to them to pay off certain politicians to cater to their crony capitalism is what's ruining America. And then you got the communist dirtbags on top of it. That's a whole nother story, that, you know, they use the capitalist system to feather their own nest and get themselves fat cat money. But they don't want you and I to have it. So then they start putting laws in place that cater to these massive few companies, and then you and I can't compete. So yes, I'm here at the mall. It's gone out of business. It's been what can be considered a normal ebb and flow of economic activity in America. These things do occur. But what's driven the mall out of business has been online sales, online business. Now, there's still some malls in place, people who have excess money here in Arizona, where there is excess money, there's still shopping centers and they're still functional, because people still want to get out of the home and go do things and see things. It's a normal human activity, you know. And so I'm going to post this on my auto channel, but it's just a matter of thinking outside the box, thinking, you know, what has happened in the United States. You know, before the internet occurred, there were malls that went out of business. It was just a change in the neighborhood, a change in people's economy, and their money's available, and people moving to where the flow of people didn't stay. And so the mall goes out of business. Look at the 1950s and early 60s, where these malls were not big like this, but strip malls. I've seen those ebb and flow as people have moved in different places. Now, if you live in an area that doesn't move that much, people don't move that much. Here in the Phoenix metro area, people move a lot. But what happens is, in the areas that people don't move a lot, things can be a lot more stable. Businesses might stay in business a lot longer. A mall may not go out like this. Now, a 40-year run for this one isn't bad at all. But what has changed in society? Well, part of the problem, too, has been they've allowed so much massive illegal immigration into the country over the past 40 years. There has been an effect in the neighborhoods behind me, where there's been a large population of illegals that have taken up residency. And this isn't just normal population growth. You know, this is the illegals that have moved in, taken up residency, given residency by laws change, stuff like that. Which is fine. People can come to the country, but you come in illegally. And so when you have people who come in who make less money, who, as these people got wealthier, they moved, and there was construction, they moved to newer developments. Well, if you don't have that ability, if you live in an area where there isn't a lot of growth like that, there's not a lot of open land where new stuff can be built, what would happen? People would improve the house they have. They would add a room on, put in new floors, carpet, make it look better, better landscaping. So it's a catch-22 as to how you want to live. You know, I've seen a lot of videos and stuff of areas back east in this country. There's not a lot of new growth, but people just keep maintaining what they have, and it's really nice stuff. And so there's a negative, positive to all of this. It's stuff that we as a culture need to think about. We as Americans need to think about. Personally, I think the online businesses should be limited and restricted. They should have, you know, only allowed to cater in certain amount of market. Amazon should not be into everything. Microsoft, Google, all those companies should, Walmart shouldn't be into everything, so that other companies can come into business, be established, create new jobs, create competition by opening a new store, opening something online. People need to work there, so they leave the other company, and then that creates job competition and salary competition. So anyway, I hope this will fit on my YouTube channel. I don't know how long it is. Bye.